Hello, my name is Jason Lupton, and this is my Week 7 assignment for FTE 217. Today's date is December 13th, 2025. As always, we're going to start with safing and clearing our firearm. We start by making sure that we have no live ammunition anywhere in our work area. Firearm is placed on safe, pointed in a safe direction. We are going to open up our action, lock it open, visually and physically inspect that there's no ammunition in the chamber. There's none. This firearm is clear. For the first part of this assignment, we're supposed to discuss the importance of trigger work, when it should be performed, when it should not be performed. So, first thing I want to discuss is safety. So the trigger is probably the biggest focus when it comes to safety, because this is what starts the entire process of firing. So we want to ensure that our trigger is as safe as possible, no matter what. So, instances where we would perform trigger work. If we were building a precision rifle that will be used on the bench rest, or if the trigger was already in an unsafe condition, or if there was an issue with the trigger releasing from the sear, anything like that, then we would possibly do trigger work. When not to do trigger work would be, say, this is a duty rifle. We wouldn't want to reduce the pull of the trigger to a wild limit, say 1.5, 2 pounds, because that creates an unsafe situation when you're traipsing through the woods or moving with the rifle. So if you're doing anything like a 3-gun competition or something where you have to shoot and move, you'd still want a duty rated trigger. Other instances where you wouldn't want to do trigger work is if it's not allowed legally, or if the shooter that you're doing the work for is a novice and doesn't understand. And this is all conversations that you can have with the customer. And if you don't feel right about it, don't do it. At the end of the day, it is our job to ensure that the firearms that we send out are safe, and that includes ensuring that they're safe for the customer. So some issues that can occur when doing trigger work is either, like I said before, making the trigger too light, or taking away the safety of the trigger. So if you look here, this is our trigger setup. Now we want to make sure that we have a positive contact between the sear surface on the trigger and the notch in the hammer. So the geometry is something like that. We want to have a good connection between the two. Let's see if I can get you to see that better. So we want to have a good mating surface between those two. So by doing the way we do that is to ensure that this angle and this angle create a good locking surface. So that way, until we pull the trigger away from that notch, we have a good solid mate. And then we have our disconnect here. We want to make sure that is working correctly as well. So some problems that can occur is you can change the geometry of these two when doing trigger work. You can make it to where when the rifle is bumped, these two surfaces disconnect from each other. So if you look, this one's shaved down at an angle to the actual plane of the trigger. And that's to ensure that we have a positive lock. If you were to shave this angle backwards, then what you would run into is the possibility of bumping the trigger and allowing the hammer to slide past. So that's part of it. That's the main part, and we don't want to mess with these springs too much, because this is what creates the tension between the sear and the hammer. So again, improper trigger work would be, for one, not knowing what you're doing and not ensuring that the rifle is safe, not only for the rifle, but for the user. So again, making sure that we're in knowing the purpose of the rifle before we do any work that could create an unsafe situation. Your bench rest shooters and things like that, they aren't loading the rifle until they're at the bench, and they may have a featherweight trigger, but they also have the experience, or should have the experience, to know, not to touch the trigger until it is time to shoot at the target. So that's the biggest thing. Next, we'll be conducting a detailed inspection of our rifle. So first thing we're going to do is look over our rifle to ensure that, for one, everything is secured and safe. We could go ahead and check the torque on all of our scope screws. We can check the security of our muzzle device. A couple of ways that you can do that. This one has a brand marking on the top, so we could put like a little mark back here to ensure that the muzzle stays in time. I've also known people to take paint markers and put little dots to ensure that that this doesn't walk off. Check the security of our foregrip, checking the security of our gas block to make sure it hasn't turned, checking our gas tube to make sure that it hasn't moved in and out. You can see it somewhat in there. And then kind of moving our way back, checking our pins for any walking on our trigger. So we would check our pins here, make sure they're not walking in and out. Checking safety, make sure it functions correctly. And now also checking the security of our hand grip and our buttstock and all the components that come with that. You can check the safety of your trigger, or check the safety, and so pointing in a safe direction, ensure the trigger is holding, and then checking function of our magazine drop and our bolt lock, make sure that works fine. That is good. So then we can go ahead and pop the upper from the lower. Again, we'll work from the outside in. So we're checking that our bolt is holding, so you can drop it on the table, make sure it doesn't fall on its own. So basically you would push the bolt out, lay it on its face, and it should not fall. And then you push it in and hold it by its face, and it should not fall. That's just checking that your gas rings are good. So we'll start disassembly. So checking our firing pin, retaining pin, make sure it's not bent or broken. Checking our fire pin, making sure that it's not ground down, bent, cracked, or extremely dirty. Making sure it's not bent there. Checking our cam pin, looking for stress fractures in this area here. Looking for any wear, excessive wear. Checking our bolt, making sure that our gas rings are installed correctly, that we don't have any cracks in our tail area here. We don't have excessive buildup of carbon in our gas area. Making sure there's no cracks in the area where the cam pin rests. Making sure that all of our lugs are secured, not cracked or bent. Checking the spring on the ejector. Pull our extractor out. Checking our extractor pin, make sure it's not bent, broken, or cracked, or extremely worn. Just checking our extractor to make sure the spring is not messed up. Make sure that we still have our donut there. Checking to see our pivot area for cracks or bends or wear. And then checking our extractor groove to make sure it's not cracked, worn excessively, or bent. And that should be good to go. Forgot to mention, make sure that we don't have no cracks in our bolt control group. Make sure that the key is secured, the key is not damaged, cracked, or excessively worn. Checking our slides, make sure that they're still in good shape. It's good to go. This next part we'll do with a flashlight. Checking down our action, make sure that we have no wear marks or cracks all throughout here. Checking our chamber, make sure that the lugs are secured, they're not cracked or wearing out. Make sure we don't have a excessive amount of fouling or anything in our lugs. We would check down the barrel to ensure that there's no rifling coming undone. Checking our feed ramps to make sure that they're not messed up. Everything looks good to go. Now we can check our lower. Again, we would check the function of our trigger. So we're going to keep our hammer from hitting the metal, but checking to make sure that all the components are installed, they are not cracked or bent. Making sure that we are having a good connection for our disconnector when we cock the hammer. So let's see if we can, as we're holding the trigger, pushing the hammer down, it should contact the disconnector and hold. And then when we let go of the trigger, it should pop back up and you'll hear an audible click. That is the sear resting in the notch of the hammer. Putting it back on safe, ensuring that it works properly. Ensure that our safety doesn't move in and out. It's good to go. Checking our buffer to make sure that the weights are moving freely inside the buffer weights. Make sure that the poly here is not damaged. Make sure that our face is not damaged, that we are not missing any pieces, not cracked. Checking our spring, make sure it's not bent and that it holds tension. And we perform a quick functions check. Safety works. Put it on fire. Pull the trigger. Disconnector works. Good to go. In my opinion, the easiest portion of making alterations or modifications is adding and subtracting components to the exterior of the firearm. I mean, I've thrown on my scope mount here and my bipod. Those were pretty easy, but now when you get into milling and things like that, that to me would be the hardest part of making alterations and modifications. Just for the simple fact that, you know, you've got to have the skill necessary and the tools required. So say I wanted to shorten my barrel, which I'm not going to do, but if say I wanted to shorten my barrel and then put my muzzle device back on, I would have to cut it off and then mill it back and then thread it and then put my muzzle device back on. And if I cut it short enough, then I would have to pin and weld my muzzle device on. All those things, they take skill, which takes a long time to learn. To me, that makes it more difficult. But doing the aesthetics on the rifle, like I said before, I do plan to hydro dip the rifle. To me, that's a pretty simple task. So that's all I've got for this video. We'll see you next week.